I don't think I did anything wrong. I just vanished for a moment with a friend. It wasn't even romantic, at least that's what I keep telling myself. But now my husband has called a lawyer, and everyone acts like I deserve what's coming. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Liora Vane, and I don't think I did anything wrong. I just vanished for a moment with a friend, that's all. It wasn't even romantic, more like a breather from the dull rhythm of marriage. But somehow that moment, the cafe, the laughter, the way Drew's hand brushed mine, turned into a headline in my own life. People talk like I committed a crime. Evan, my husband, hasn't raised his voice once. He doesn't need to. His silence has shape now, tight, deliberate, full of steps I can't see but feel closing in. I keep telling myself he's overreacting, that every marriage has its storms, and that I'm just unlucky mine went public. Still, when he looks at me with that steady calm, I almost wish he'd shout. It would mean I still mattered. Instead, he's polite, efficient, and terrifying in his orderliness. Friends say he's grieving his pride. I say he's plotting paperwork. Maybe both. All I know is that a simple, stupid moment, barely a few minutes out of sight, has turned into the center of everything. And now, as his lawyer calls and my phone keeps lighting up, I can't stop wondering when a small mistake became a legal matter. I woke up that morning feeling restless, the bed on Evan's side untouched and the air too neat. He had left a note about the bills, precise and impersonal, and I couldn't stop thinking about how little life seemed to happen between us anymore. I told myself it was just routine, that he was organized, careful, but I wanted something else. Attention, excitement, a spark I hadn't felt in weeks. When Drew texted from the cafe near the river, I didn't hesitate. It was just coffee, I told myself, nothing more. He had been part of the event planning team for months, funny in a way that made people feel lighter. Around him, I felt alive, noticed, like I mattered outside the confines of our orderly home. I dressed quickly, left a note for Evan that I'd be out briefly, and slipped into the morning sunlight. The cafe was bustling, warm with chatter and the smell of fresh bread. Drew had already ordered my usual oat milk latte with extra cinnamon. He smiled when I walked in and said I looked like I needed the break. I laughed and told him he wasn't wrong. We talked about the upcoming charity gala, deadlines, and endless phone calls. He said I carried stress well, but I knew he noticed the tension I hid. I joked that Evan's schedules and lists were relentless, and he nodded, saying men often confuse stability with control. We walked along the river after coffee, the city humming around us. I laughed at something he said, the sound too bright, too loud, and I noticed the way a coworker passing by glanced at us. I pulled back slightly, pretending it was nothing. Drew leaned closer to point out something trivial in our planning, and I felt a rush of warmth I hadn't felt in months. It was attention, validation, harmless in my mind, yet I sensed the weight of it, knowing Evan would see, even if he didn't speak. By the time I returned home, it was past 7. Evan was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, arms folded. The house smelled faintly of coffee. He asked where I'd been, calm but direct. I said I lost track of time. He asked with who. I said just a friend. He didn't press further, only nodded slowly. That single word, figured, landed wrong. It sounded like judgment dressed as reason. I asked what that was supposed to mean, and he said nothing, rinsed his mug quietly. The water sound felt louder than any argument. Later that night, I tried to restore normalcy. I sat beside him on the couch, told him about Drew, the gala, the sponsor we'd secured. He barely looked up from his laptop. I asked if he was listening. He said yes, just finishing something. I reminded him we barely talked anymore. He said I seemed busy enough. I laughed bitterly, told him that sounded like an excuse. He closed the laptop, looked at me evenly, and said, "No excuses, only observations." His calmness made my chest tighten. The next morning, the faint smell of printer toner lingered in the living room. 2 mugs sat on the counter, his polished, mine half full. He left for work, saying he'd be home late. I tried to ignore the unease curling in my stomach. I texted Drew, smiling at the thrill of attention, the idea that someone could see me in a way Evan no longer did. But even as I typed, I felt the quiet pressure of his observation, the invisible weight of his calm, methodical presence. I told myself I still had control, that the moment with Drew was innocent, that Evan's silence was just a phase. But the folders, the neat stacks, the locked drawers, small signs I'd noticed over the past week, had begun to feel like something else entirely, something deliberate. And I couldn't stop wondering how long it would be before that quiet planning became visible, unavoidable, and real. The week after the cafe visit felt heavy, though nothing in the house had changed outwardly. Evan still spoke only when necessary, his tone calm, almost polite, but each word seemed measured, deliberate. I told myself it was just his way, that he was being organized, not punitive. Yet every glance, every quiet movement felt like it carried weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was observing, cataloging, preparing. At work, Drew was close again, reviewing details for the gala. He leaned over to point at slides, brushed against my arm lightly, and smiled. I laughed at his jokes, felt the familiar rush of being seen. My phone buzzed, another reminder of the invisible tether between me and Evan. I ignored it, telling myself his quietness wasn't threatening, that Drew's attention was harmless. That evening, when I arrived home, the kitchen was impeccably neat. 2 mugs sat on the counter, his cleaned, mine half full. I told myself it didn't matter, but when I passed the guest room, I noticed the door slightly ajar. I called softly. Only the faint tap of keys responded. He was at it again, methodical, precise, cataloguing something I could not see. I tried to create normalcy. I cooked dinner, lit a candle, and asked him about his day. He answered with clipped, exact sentences. I asked if he was upset. "Not upset, alert, awareness is different," he said. I laughed nervously, brushed it off, but my chest tightened. Over the next few days, small changes accumulated. Sticky notes appeared in strategic spots. Downtown 9 file, errands, another, bring forms. A USB labeled with a recent date sat tucked beneath a folder marked taxes. Each detail seemed ordinary, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself he was just organized, but the precision unsettled me. At work, Drew noticed my tension. He asked if everything was okay. I said yes, though my hands trembled slightly as I typed. I imagined Evan checking every post, every message, every detail I shared. I tried to focus on planning the gala, laughing at Drew's comments, pretending I was unaffected, but my mind kept returning to the house, the locked drawers, the USBs, the careful order of everything. My mother called that night. She had seen photos from the gala and the cafe. She asked if Evan was upset. I laughed, said no. She said men like him always overreacted, that I needed to remember my worth, that no one should control how I spent my time. I nodded, though a flicker of unease remained. By Friday, I was restless. Drew had sent a message asking about decorations. I typed a reply but deleted it before sending. I couldn't stop thinking about Evan's quiet, his folders, his notes, the humming printer. His calm was not indifference. It pressed on me, methodical and relentless. That evening, 2 mugs sat as usual, the faint smell of toner lingering. I told myself I still controlled my story, that charm and attention were enough to maintain my influence. But when I passed the guest room door and heard the faint click of keys, I realized the truth. His quiet was not absence. It was preparation. The patterns, the small signs, all pointed to a response I could not predict, a reckoning that would arrive on his terms, precise and unavoidable. By the end of the week, I tried to confront him gently, to charm my way back into normalcy. I whispered, "I just wanted to shine tonight." The door lock clicked softly from inside. I realized then that fixing anything was no longer my choice. His methodical, deliberate approach had set the stage for a reckoning I could not avoid, and I had no idea when it would come. The weekend of the gala arrived with a heat that made the city streets shimmer. I was running late, rushing to finish final touches on the floral arrangements, when Drew called from the lobby. He said everything was set, that the lighting looked spectacular, that he'd even adjusted the projector so my name appeared first on the slides. I felt a thrill, a spark of pride that I hadn't felt in months. I laughed, told him he was spoiling me, and brushed past the thought of Evan entirely. By the time I entered the hall, the room was full of people, committee members, local sponsors, even a few city council members. Cameras flashed every time someone stepped in, capturing smiles, glasses raised, speeches prepared. I moved through the crowd like a conductor, greeting people, shaking hands, giving the warmth of recognition. Drew stayed close, whispering updates in my ear, adjusting the mic, checking the lighting. I felt powerful, noticed, untouchable. Then I saw him. Evan, standing near the back, hands in his pockets, observing everything with that careful, measured gaze that had once been comforting. Now it made me uneasy. He didn't approach me, didn't call my name. He simply watched, almost like a stranger. I told myself he was just waiting to see how I handled the room, but part of me already knew better. The speeches began, and I took the stage. I introduced the committee, thanked sponsors, and highlighted our goals for the charity. Every eye was on me. I caught Drew's smile in the audience, nodding approval. I felt a rush and smiled wider, laughing lightly at the applause. The cameras clicked. The crowd reacted exactly as I had imagined. Impressed, engaged, enthralled. I looked toward the back to see Evan. He hadn't moved. The way his shoulders were squared, jaw tight, gave me a jolt. For a moment, I felt exposed, like he could see through every layer of charm I'd built around myself. After my part ended, I descended from the stage. People crowded around to congratulate me. Someone took a photo, and I leaned slightly toward Drew, just enough that our heads were close in the frame. Laughter followed, subtle but loud enough to make Evan notice. I felt a tiny thrill. Maybe he was jealous. Maybe he was going to confront me. But he didn't. He only observed, quiet, detached, a spectator to a show I thought I controlled. Later, the event moved to dinner. I sat at the head of the table with Drew beside me, everyone else around, chatting and toasting. I mentioned how smoothly the decorations had gone, how impressed I was with the volunteers. Drew nodded, smiled, said it was a pleasure working with someone who truly saw possibilities. I laughed, agreed, and then something almost imperceptible happened. Evan's face, calm until then, tightened at my words. I tried to brush it off. I told myself he didn't understand event planning, didn't grasp how much energy went into these moments. But my mother noticed. She whispered, "He looks upset." I rolled my eyes, said he was just tired. She leaned closer and murmured, "Or maybe he's finally seeing you outside his control." I laughed lightly, even though the comment made my stomach knot. After dinner, some of the guests lingered for dessert. I stepped outside onto the balcony for a moment, Drew following a few steps behind. The city lights were glittering, music floating faintly from inside. He complimented my speech again, said the way I handled questions from donors was impressive. I said thank you, letting my chest rise with pride. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Evan step onto the balcony's far side. He didn't come closer, didn't speak. His posture was neutral, but the way he held himself, still and measured, carried weight. I felt a pang of discomfort. I tried to act normal, turned to Drew and laughed at something trivial. He noticed the tension, said softly, "You okay?" I smiled, said yes, but my voice sounded brittle even to me. Evan didn't move. He just watched. After a while, I excused myself, saying I needed to check on a few things inside. As I moved through the hall, I passed near him. He didn't speak. He didn't glance at me. I felt a cold twist of shame, almost as if my entire performance had been observed under a microscope I didn't know existed. Back inside, Drew helped me with some last-minute adjustments. I laughed too much, let my gestures linger, smiled with emphasis. The crowd was still cheering, the cameras still flashing, and I felt triumphant. Then I caught Evan's eyes from across the room. They were steady, calm, observing, and in that moment, I felt exposed in a way I hadn't expected. He wasn't yelling, wasn't confrontational. He didn't need to be. The quiet pressure of his presence was enough. After the event ended, I walked to the exit, expecting Drew to follow. He lingered behind to speak with another organizer. I glanced back at Evan. He was gone. His absence struck harder than any confrontation could have. I told myself he'd gone to another room, to calm down, to wait for me. But my phone buzzed with a message from Drew. "Did you see him leave?" I laughed, said yes, probably just going home early. My chest tightened, a small warning signal I chose to ignore. The drive home was tense. I replayed the evening over in my head, every smile, every gesture, every laugh. I told myself Evan had overreacted, that I was right to shine in public, that Drew's attention was harmless. But a small voice nagged, whispering that his quiet had weight, that it was not indifference but something more precise. When I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was the order. Everything was in its place. Mugs on the counter, keys lined up, bills stacked neatly in a corner. Evan was in the guest room. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I just observed for a moment. The faint hum of the printer reminded me of the last week, of the little patterns I'd noticed but ignored. I went to the kitchen, picked up a mug, rinsed it. Mine, half full, his empty and cleaned, separated again. I set mine down, trying not to notice the space between us. I heard the soft click of a drawer closing, and I realized he had been at it again. Notes, receipts, folders, all organized, catalogued, accounted for. I reminded myself that he wasn't angry, just precise, preparing. Later, Drew texted again, asking if I wanted to meet after the gala for a small celebration. I hesitated. My chest felt heavy. I typed, "Maybe tomorrow," then deleted it. He responded immediately, "Are you sure?" I ignored the phone, walked to the living room. Evan's mug sat on the counter, untouched. I told myself I could ignore the tension, that it was temporary. I checked on Nora. She was asleep in her room, drawings scattered across the desk. She stirred slightly, murmured, then rolled over. I kissed her forehead, felt a pang of guilt. I wondered if she sensed the invisible walls Evan was building. I told myself she didn't, that children adapt, that I was right to prioritize my moments of excitement, my sense of being seen. By midnight, the house was quiet. I went to the guest room to check if Evan was there. Door closed, lock clicked. I didn't knock, I didn't call. I lay on the couch, listening. I told myself his distance was temporary, that he'd return, that I could explain everything, that he would understand eventually. But the hum of the printer in my mind wouldn't stop. The next morning, I woke early. The faint light on the counter highlighted the notes he had left. One said, "Downtown 9:25, personal." Another sticky note had a small scribble I hadn't noticed before. "Bring forms." I crumpled it in my hand, told myself it was for work, that I was overthinking. Still, the precision in his handwriting, the exact times, the small notes, it unsettled me more than any argument had. At the office, Drew noticed my mood immediately. He asked if I was nervous. I said no, though my voice faltered. He reached out, brushed my arm gently, and said, "It's just him. He's controlling in ways that don't need shouting." I laughed, more at the truth in the words than the joke. I told him I knew, but that I couldn't help feeling exposed when he acted so calm, so precise. Back home, Evan didn't say a word about the office, about Drew, about the night. He simply moved through the rooms, placing his mug on the counter, adjusting the bills, arranging folders. Each movement deliberate, quiet, unremarkable to anyone else but full of significance to me. I asked him if he wanted dinner. He said yes, then added, "I'll eat where I can see order." I laughed, said, "You make everything sound serious." He said, "Some things are serious whether you want them to be or not." That night, I tried again, whispering as I passed the guest room, "I just wanted to shine tonight." I waited for a response. Silence. Only the faint sound of him typing, the light from under the door. I told myself it was frustration, that it was temporary. But as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized this was more than frustration. It was calculation. And calculation, in silence, has a weight heavier than any argument, louder than any shout. By the next morning, I was restless. I checked my phone for messages from Drew. None. I scrolled through the gala photos online, seeing myself laughing, standing close to Drew. The comments were full of praise. I laughed, but it felt hollow. Evan's absence was a shadow across every image, his quieter presence I could not ignore. I went to the kitchen, 2 mugs again, my half full, his spotless. A drawer clicked. A faint toner smell lingered in the air. I told myself it was nothing, that I could control the narrative, that this was still my story. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Something had shifted. Evan wasn't just observing, he was documenting, he was preparing, and I had no idea what it would mean. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to focus on work, on planning, on maintaining the illusion that nothing was wrong. Drew sent another message, asking if I wanted to discuss decorations. I typed back an enthusiastic yes, deleted it before he could see that part of me was uneasy. I didn't want him to know I was finally aware that Evan's calm was more than patience. It was strategy. That evening, I walked into the living room, expecting him to be gone or busy elsewhere. He was there, sitting in his usual place, eyes on a folder labeled bank. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Keeping track of things." I said, "Things you didn't care about before." He said, "Things matter when they can't be ignored." I told myself it was just fussiness, but my heart skipped. I checked on Nora, who was quietly playing. She didn't ask about Drew or the gala, didn't mention anything about me vanishing. I kissed her forehead and whispered that everything was fine. She smiled faintly, eyes serious beyond her years. I wondered if she already sensed what I refused to admit. That Evan's silence was no longer just distance. It was something far more intentional, something I couldn't charm, manipulate, or outshine. I went to bed that night, my mind racing, the faint hum of a printer in my memory, the soft click of drawers, the smell of toner, small details easily overlooked, yet they pressed on me like a countdown. I told myself that tomorrow everything would feel normal again, that Evan would return to his old self, that I could reclaim the story. But a part of me already knew. The quiet calculation had begun. By Monday, the tension in the house was palpable, though outwardly everything looked normal. I moved through the rooms carrying laundry, checking the calendar, smiling at Nora as she drew quietly. Evan never spoke more than a few sentences a day, but his presence filled every corner. I told myself it was because he was busy, focused on work, but there was something else, something deliberate, measured, like he was playing a game I didn't know the rules for. That morning, I went to the office with a lightness I tried to fake. Drew was there, arranging props for the upcoming gala. He smiled when he saw me and said, I looked radiant, more alive than the week before. I laughed, Said it was just energy from the event, but part of me felt a pang of guilt. I knew Evan was watching, cataloguing, observing. I dismissed it quickly. After all, I hadn't done anything wrong, at least not in my mind. During lunch, Gina called. She said she'd heard whispers at her office. People were talking about me and Drew, about the cafe, the photos, the gala. I laughed it off, told her they were jealous, that Evan was overreacting. She agreed, said men like him couldn't handle a confident woman. I felt a rush of relief, glad someone was on my side. That evening, I returned home and found Evan in the kitchen, organizing receipts in neat stacks. I asked if he needed help. He said no, that he liked order. I teased him lightly, saying it sounded obsessive. He looked at me without emotion and said, "Obsession is a word people use when they don't understand control." I smiled, tried to dismiss it, but the words lingered. Later, as I was putting Nora to bed, I noticed the way she hesitated before answering my questions. Her eyes flicked toward Evan's closed guest room door. I asked if she was tired. She nodded. I kissed her forehead and whispered goodnight. Alone in her room, I felt a small pang of fear. Maybe she already knew something I refused to see, that Evan's quiet was more than distance. Back in the living room, I opened my laptop. Drew had sent a draft of the gala program. I smiled at his notes, the way he highlighted my contributions, called me partner in every line. My heart swelled, but I could feel Evan's gaze even from the guest room. He didn't need to say anything. The quiet itself was a statement. That night, I tried to talk to him. I asked about his day, about meetings, about anything that would draw him out. He responded in short sentences, precise, measured. I told him he was acting distant. He said, "Distance is just space. Space is different than absence." I pressed, asking what that meant. He didn't answer. He went into the guest room and closed the door. The lock clicked softly. I stood there, staring at the door, feeling a tight knot in my chest. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes everywhere. The printer hummed at odd hours. Folders labeled Archive, A, and Bank appeared in his study. A sticky note on the counter read, "Bring forms." A USB labeled by date sat taped under a folder marked Taxes. Each detail seemed innocuous, but together they painted a pattern I couldn't ignore. At work, Drew noticed my distraction. He asked if everything was okay. I laughed, said yes, but my hand shook slightly as I typed. I realized I was constantly checking my phone, half expecting Evan to call or text, even though I knew he wouldn't. I felt cornered by his silence, a quiet pressure that left me anxious despite my best efforts to stay composed. One evening, my mother came over. She brought wine and asked how the gala had gone. I told her everything, including the part where Evan had watched quietly, not speaking. She laughed, said he was too serious, that men like him always overreacted to attention. She said I needed to remember my worth, that no man should dictate who I could spend time with. I nodded, but inside, a flicker of unease had already begun to grow. That night, I sat in the living room, pretending to relax. I checked my phone obsessively, replaying messages from Drew, reading social media posts about the gala, noting every like and comment. Each one made me feel alive, validated, untouchable, but also vulnerable, because I knew Evan saw everything, catalogued everything, silently observing without a word. When he came home, he placed his mug on the counter across from mine. I asked why he didn't sit with me. He said, "I like perspective." I said, "Perspective?" He nodded, precise and calm. "From here, everything is clearer." I told him he sounded cryptic. He said, "Clarity isn't always comfortable." I tried to laugh it off, but my chest tightened. The next morning, I woke to find another sticky note. Downtown 8:45, paper drop. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was work, that it didn't mean anything personal. But the exact time, the word paper, the careful handwriting, it felt like a signal I wasn't meant to ignore. I shoved it in my pocket and went about my day, telling myself I was overthinking, that Evan was just methodical. At lunch, Drew noticed my unease. He asked if something had happened at home. I laughed, told him nothing, that Evan was fine. But the truth gnawed at me. I couldn't stop thinking about the notes, the folders, the small signs of preparation everywhere. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting, imagining what he might be planning, why he was so silent yet so present. That evening, I made dinner early, hoping to bridge the distance. Evan sat at the table, organized as always. I tried conversation, asking about his day, talking about Nora, trying to sound light and engaged. He responded minimally, answering questions without elaboration. I asked if he was upset with me. He said, not upset, alert. Awareness is different. I told myself it was just another one of his quirks, but the words felt deliberate, precise, carrying weight. After dinner, I went to the study to check emails. On the desk, I noticed a small envelope I hadn't seen before. I touched it lightly. It was empty, just sitting there, perfectly folded, almost like a placeholder. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence, but I couldn't shake the sense that it was part of a pattern, part of a strategy I couldn't yet see. Later, I found Drew in the office again. He had a project mock-up on the screen and smiled when I came in. I told him about the envelope, the notes, the strange precision of Evan's recent actions. He nodded slowly, said, "He's not angry, he's planning." I laughed nervously, brushing it off, but the words lodged themselves in my mind. Planning, not reacting, not yelling, not leaving, just planning. That night, I checked on Nora. She was asleep, curled up with her drawings. I kissed her forehead, whispered goodnight, and realized she had already absorbed more than I wanted. She sensed the tension, the unspoken rules, the walls rising around us. I told myself I was overreacting, that children notice everything, yet understand little. But the fear lingered. Back in the living room, I stared at the two mugs, at the neat stacks of paper, the faint smell of toner. I told myself I still had control of my story, that I could manage the narrative with charm, wit, and attention. But deep down, I knew the quiet, deliberate precision wasn't about anger. It was about something else, something I couldn't outmaneuver with a joke or a social media post. I lay in bed that night, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, trying to convince myself I could maintain the illusion of control. The faint click of the guest room door locking, the smell of printer toner, the precise time notes left around the house. It all pressed on me, constant and unrelenting. I realized I had underestimated him. Evan wasn't reacting, he was preparing, and whatever was coming, I would not see it until it landed in front of me, impossible to ignore. By the end of the week, I was exhausted. I moved through the house quietly, watching him from a distance, noting the neat piles of paper, the locked drawers, the small USBs tucked under folders. Each day added more signs, and yet I convinced myself I was still untouchable, still in control, still the one with the narrative. But the truth was settling in, uncomfortably and undeniably. Evan's silence was not absence, nor was it indecision. It was strategy, and I didn't know the rules of the game. By the start of the following week, the house had become a quiet battlefield. Every step I took felt monitored. Every glance from Evan weighed with unspoken meaning. I told myself it was paranoia, that his calm demeanor was just his way of being orderly. But the details I'd been ignoring for weeks, folders neatly labeled, USBs tucked under files, printer humming at odd hours, began to feel like a map of his intentions. I tried to keep my routines, to maintain appearances, but even the simplest gestures felt scrutinized. At work, Drew was close again, reviewing the gala program with me. He leaned in to point at the slides, and I felt that familiar thrill of attention. But even as I smiled, I noticed the way I kept checking my phone, half expecting Evan to have sent a note or a message. He didn't. Silence had become a pressure I could feel, heavy and precise. I laughed at Drew's jokes, replied to his texts with enthusiasm, but inside, my pulse kept reminding me I wasn't untouchable. That evening, I arrived home to find the kitchen unnervingly neat. 2 mugs sat on the counter, his polished, mine still half full. I told myself it didn't matter, that the world outside our home still validated me, that Drew's attention made me radiant. But when I passed the guest room, I noticed the door slightly ajar. I called his name softly. No answer. I stepped closer and heard the faint tap of a keyboard. He was at it again, methodical, deliberate, cataloguing something I could not see. I asked him if he wanted dinner. He said yes, then added in a tone that felt steady and measured, "We'll eat when it's ready." I said it sounded formal. He said, "Formality keeps expectation clear." I laughed nervously, brushing off the tension, and went to check on Nora. She was sitting at the table, coloring quietly. I asked about her day. She said it was fine, but her eyes kept flicking toward the guest room door. I kissed her forehead, whispered goodnight, and felt a twinge of guilt. She already sensed the undercurrents I refused to admit. Later, I found Drew waiting with a sample of table arrangements for the gala. He complimented my eye for detail, how well I coordinated colors and flowers. I smiled, let him brush close to point at a centerpiece, and felt the familiar rush of being seen. I told myself it was harmless, that Evan's reaction was my problem to manage, but my phone buzzed mid-discussion. Another reminder of the invisible thread that tethered me to him, even as I sought validation elsewhere. By Thursday, I noticed he had started leaving little notes in strategic places. One on the counter read, "Downtown 9 Chew, errands." Another, smaller, tucked under a folder, "Bring forms." A USB labeled with a recent date was taped carefully beneath a folder marked taxes. Each detail seemed innocuous, yet together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I wanted to dismiss it, to say he was just organized, that he wasn't planning anything personal. But something about the precision gnawed at me. That night, I tried to bridge the growing distance. I cooked his favorite stew and lit a candle on the table. I set our mugs across from each other, careful to maintain the invisible boundaries. I asked about his day, about meetings, about anything that would coax him into conversation. He responded minimally, with clipped, precise sentences. I asked if he was upset with me. He said calmly, "Not upset, alert. Awareness is different." I forced a laugh, tried to dismiss the weight in his words, but my chest tightened. I spent the next few days in a haze of minor panic. At work, Drew continued to give me attention, complimenting my work, joking lightly. I laughed, even as I noticed my hands trembling slightly each time my phone buzzed. I imagined the note he might leave, the folder he might open, the meticulous records he was gathering. I told myself I was overreacting. After all, I hadn't done anything wrong, at least not to my standards. One evening, my mother called. She said she'd seen photos from the gala and the post-event party. She asked if I was happy, if Evan was okay. I laughed, said yes, though my heart wasn't in it. She told me men like him overreacted, that I needed to remember my worth. "No one should dictate who you can spend time with or how you're noticed," she said. I nodded, but a flicker of unease had already begun to grow. Later that night, I walked through the living room, pretending to relax. I noted the precise alignment of the folders, the faint smell of toner in the air, the locked drawers in his study. I told myself I could manage this. That charm and social grace were all I needed. But even as I convinced myself of that, a quiet dread was settling in. By Friday, I was restless. Drew had sent another message, checking on the final arrangements for the gala. I typed a reply, but deleted it before sending. I couldn't stop thinking about Evan's methods, the folders, the sticky notes, the USBs. He wasn't reacting in anger or confrontation. He was planning, and I could feel it pressing in on me like a tide. When I got home that evening, the kitchen was still unnervingly neat. 2 mugs sat as always, separate, a barrier between us. The faint hum of the printer reminded me of the week, of the patterns I had ignored. I told myself it was nothing, that I could charm my way back into normalcy, that I could maintain control. But as I sat at the table, scrolling through photos and messages from Drew, I realized that control was slipping, that Evan's quiet precision had more power than I had anticipated. I decided to try one last bridge. I whispered as I passed the guest room door, "I just wanted to shine tonight." Silence answered. I pressed my ear lightly to the door, listening to the faint click of keys, the soft rustle of paper. I told myself it was just work, just organization, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more. That this calm, deliberate planning wasn't about order, it was about preparing for something I would not see until it arrived. The weekend arrived, and with it, another layer of tension. I tried to focus on work, on Drew, on anything to distract myself. I laughed at his jokes, let him lean close, smiled at his compliments. But my mind kept returning to Evan, to the locked drawers, the sticky notes, the USBs, the faint hum of the printer, and the careful alignment of everything in the house. He wasn't reacting. He was preparing. And the realization made me uneasy in ways I couldn't articulate. Sunday night, I walked past the guest room one last time before bed. The faint glow from under the door illuminated the lock. I whispered his name softly, just to hear a response. None came. I told myself I was imagining threats, that nothing had changed, but the hum of calculation, the invisible weight of his preparation, pressed down on me in a way I could no longer ignore. By the start of the next week, I was certain of it. Evan wasn't going to confront me with anger, yelling, or dramatics. He was going to respond in the only way he knew how, precisely, deliberately, lawfully. And I had no idea when the results of his careful planning would arrive, only that my sense of control, my narrative, my story, was no longer mine to command. The calm in his actions had become a quiet threat, and for the first time, I realized that no amount of charm, attention, or distraction could undo it. I had underestimated him for too long, and now I was left with the tension of waiting, knowing that at any moment, everything I had taken for granted could shift irreversibly under the weight of his methodical, deliberate preparation. That night, I tried to sleep, but the hum of the printer, the locked drawers, the tiny notes, and the neatly stacked USBs filled my mind. I told myself that he would eventually speak, eventually explain, that everything could be resolved, but deep inside, I felt a small, undeniable certainty. Evan's patience was not weakness, nor was it indifference. It was strategy, and it was only a matter of time before it became reality. By the end of the weekend, I had decided to confront him gently, to apologize, to charm my way back into a semblance of normalcy. I sat in the living room, rehearsing the words I would say. But even as I prepared, I knew that the small threads of evidence, the sticky notes, the USBs, the printer hum, all pointed toward a response I could not predict, a response that would leave my carefully constructed world unsettled and exposed. I crossed the room to the guest room one last time, paused at the door, and whispered, "We can fix this." The lock clicked softly from the inside. I realized then that fixing anything was no longer my choice. I had been patient, strategic in my own way, but his methodical, calm approach had set the stage for a reckoning I could not avoid. Whatever came next, I knew I was about to see the full measure of his preparation, and it would not involve argument, pleading, or negotiation. It would be delivered precisely, deliberately, and lawfully, and I had no way to stop it. The courthouse plaza was crowded, cameras flashing, people murmuring. I stepped forward, trying to smile, to control the moment, but Evan was already there, calm and composed. A process server approached, handed me a thick envelope, and I felt the weight of every quiet calculation. I opened it, saw the divorce petition, custody arrangements, and financial orders, all effective immediately. The papers slipped from my hands as the reality hit. It was over.